Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and this week's guest is the 2021 NFBC Main Event Overall Champion, Phil Dussault. Phil, thanks for joining me, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, James?
I am doing great. Excited to have you back on. So I know that you've started drafting. You've done a couple of your Champions League qualifier, 2/3 of it, right?
I'm about halfway through my DC, and my OC is done. I didn't pick the best night to do it. I did it when everything went crazy with the NFBC. So I was drafting and looking at Twitter and Discord at the same time. So it was a little bit distracting, but I realized that I can still multitask like I did last year, where I can chat and draft at the same time. So it was good practice for live draft season in March.
Yeah, if you're gonna be multitasking, I guess the OC is the one to do it for.
Yeah, good thing is I was picking first, so luckily I got Acuna, and also just made it easier just to make back-to-back picks, and then could look around Twitter to see if everything was good, was still going smoothly, and if my draft would still mean anything 2 months from now, but looks like it will. So,
well, let's save the thoughts on Acuna. We'll get there in a second. But
yeah,
did you have anything else you wanted to share just about how those first couple of drafts went? Like, did you try to make it even more boring than usual with it being a CLQ? Anything you want to kind of share about your pre-draft or what players you ended up with?
The OC, I kind of went a separate route because I know my default drafting setting in my brain is to play it safe. So if I'm drafting a main event, I always try to go safer, go for playing time. And I know when I get to an OC, I need to take more risk because replacement value is so high that you can afford to take risks. So when it came to pitching, I had no problem taking Chris Sale, Justin Verlander, Charlie Morton, the old guys that were falling. So I figure if they're healthy in spring, they're going to move up. If they're not, well, it's an OC, so I can find replacements. And same thing with the hitting, especially late in the draft. I know the past few years I've been short on power. So I see Tyler O'Neill sitting there late. I see Giancarlo Stanton. I'm like, never drafted Stanton, but like late in an OC for power, he might be healthy for a month or for 2 months. And I take those, 10 home runs and then drop him if I have to. So it's the kind of picks I was trying to make. With my last pick of the draft, I wish I was you, and I wish I had you in my mind just to tell me which prospect to take that could move up. Had a couple names in mind with Colt Keith and Tyler Black, and they both went. So I was just sitting there. Finally, I took Julio Urias. I'm like, I know it's not going to do anything, but it's the only name. Even Trevor Bauer was gone. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, either take a boring pitcher that I know I'm going to drop, or take a really wild gamble and someone that might not be suspended for whatever reason, because MLB can be unpredictable. So I know I'll be dropping in probably that first fab before season even starts, but at least I kind of followed my pattern of trying to be a little bit more bold with these picks in the OC. So we'll see what happens. But I do like the team, and Acuna does give an edge. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but it's good to start a draft with him.
So good for people at home to that you can use those last spots in an OC on guys you might drop, and that you should be prepared with an idea of which players to look for at those spots, so that you're not ended up with Julio Urias.
I had about 45. I kind of I hadn't planned to do my OC, and then I saw the room. A couple of names especially one name that I won't name, but I was somewhat targeting someone I've been in drafts before, and he tends to give up on the season at times. So I just felt like it was the good time to jump in. I had about 45 minutes to an hour to get ready. And then about 30 minutes before the draft, the NFBC thing happened. So that 45 minutes to an hour dropped to about 30 minutes. So I was ready for most of it, but not for the end. So definitely don't do what I did with the end game. I know people can do better than that, or they can just pull up your your rankings, James, and do something better than I did.
So are you just doing a bunch of work when you're on the clock in this DC, or how's that going?
I mean, my draft sheet is ready. So with this DC, now I've got a list of late prospects I'm targeting. But that's for like rounds 35 and 40 plus. I mean, the guys who won in the last 5 rounds of an OC aren't guys who won in a DC. From rounds, I don't know, 25 to 35 in a DC, I'm still going boring. I just want playing time. I want innings. So it's like a completely opposite, different mindset. So I was ready for the DC. My sheet is ready for that. But I mean, I'll look up some names. Like one names, actually we'll talk about him later, so I won't name him, but he's a guy that's at the top of my sheet, and just doing quick research, I'd rather not draft him at this point. So I'm still tweaking things and so on, and have done all my research, not ready to pick within 5 seconds like I will be in March, but I'm pretty ready.
Are you gonna oh shoot, I forgot what I was gonna say. Okay, so did you want to like talk about anything about the Champions League format at all? I know that like Toby's kind of the hype man for that on Twitter, but I know we just kind of discussed it without even really explaining it necessarily. But
so for those that don't know, it's a new format that the NFBC is doing this year that Toby came up with, and we kind of helped them, myself, Steve Weimer, and Rob DiPietro helped them tweak it a little bit. So basically you buy a package, you get 1 main event, 1 online championship, and 1 draft champions. Those 3 usually add up to $2,250. So there's an extra $250 that goes towards the Champions League pot. And then basically the way that the standings work is if there's 150 people, it's basically 30 categories, and you're going to be ranked 1 to 50. So getting between 150 and 1 point in those 30 categories. And then those points add up, and the top 15 teams will qualify for the Champions League next year, and we'll be doing a live auction in Vegas. What I love about it, and what Greg loves about it as well, is that even in the high stakes league, whether it's main event, even the platinum, the diamond, usually those higher stakes league, it's the people that can afford it, but you're not necessarily getting the better players. And I think in this Champions League, the fact that it's 3 leagues put together, we're going to get, I think, the best players. So just having 15 of the best players sitting at the same table in an auction in Vegas next year will just be amazing, because I don't think we've ever really seen that. I think that auction is going to be pretty special. And even Mike Mager was tweeting about it today. He's like, I'm feeling extra pressure making these picks for my Champions League qualifier DC, because it's not a regular DC. You want that specific DC to do well. So, and I'm feeling it also as I'm doing my DC and as I did my OC. And I guess from my part, I'm kind of feeling pressure to qualify. Because I know people talk about me, and they think I'm a good player. So if I don't qualify, I feel like I'll let myself down. But I always feel like despite the year I had in 2021, the results I've had, I always feel like I have to back up what I've done to remain one of the best players. So feel like this is a chance to prove it. And I want to be at that table next year.
Well, I want to be at that table too, but I feel no pressure. And I think I might have been the first person to do my CLQ DC. Not 100% sure on that, but I just jumped into the first room I could find, just because I like doing those earlier in the calendar than later.
Yeah. But, you're usually ready, but you're more ready than most at that time of year. So I think it's a good time to take advantage of your skills.
I should be more ready. Like I don't have any excuse to not be as more ready. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. Did you time the DC start or at least the OC to try to beat any of the projection systems that got released in the past week or so?
No, honestly, I finished my system, and I think 2 days later, I jumped in because I was just craving to draft. I hadn't drafted yet, and I'm like, I only do one 150 DC. This is the one I signed up for $1,000 DC that I'll do later. But I wish it was a better story, more strategic, but I just wanted to draft. So the first room I liked, I jumped in, and I like the team so far. So hopefully the last 26 or so rounds go well.
Okay, so I mentioned I wanted to talk about Acuna. Just kind of curious, like, this is probably, I think, the biggest sort of pre-season edge that I can recall there being for the number one player. Obviously, if we all knew that, like, Jacob deGrom in his prime was just going to be healthy for the whole season, like, obviously, sure, but like, I can't recall a hitter at least being like this far away ahead of the pack. And so I was just kind of curious if you think this edge that he has is great enough for it to impact, how many times you're entering a certain contest. Like, would you want to keep getting entries until you had a team that picked first, or would you maybe kind of cut off your entries into a contest if you do get that first overall pick because you already have an Acuna team? Like, do you think they're, in like a 15-team league, theoretically, before any picks are made, every team's got like a 6 2/3 chance of winning the league? Would you say like the Acuna team automatically starts off at like 7% or like 8%? Like, what type of edge do you think we're talking about here with getting that first overall pick?
All right, so I've got data for you and I've got questions for you. So last year, Acuna, the main event, the win rate for Acuna teams was 17%. Cash rate was 34%. So that's about, the cash rate is about, the win rate about 2.5 times the norm, and the cash rate 1.7 times what we'd expect. Per my numbers, he had 14 SGP more than was expected at his ADP, which was 1 overall. The interesting thing, in 2022, Judge had a 16.4 edge in ADP. So Judge wasn't as good, but because he was a 4th round pick, I believe the edge compared to where he was drafted was bigger than Acuna's was last year. Last year, there were 3 pitchers that had between 9 and 10 SGP more than where they were drafted. Any guesses who those pitchers are?
Okay, so how many?
There's 3 of them that beat their ADP by between 9 and 10 SGP. There were the 3 pitchers that beat their ADP. They're not fab guys. They were drafted in all main events, and they beat their ADP by the most SGP. I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Was let's see, was Pablo Lopez one?
No, they were all going around pick probably 250, 300.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Geez. I mean, I know Bradish was kind of going around there.
Yeah, he's one of them.
Justin Steele.
Yeah. And then the other one with the Rays.
Oh, Eflin.
Yeah. So those 3 were between 9 and 10. Acuna was 14, but and the win rates for these 3 guys average about 18%, and their cash rate was 38%. So the teams that drafted one of those guys actually did better than the Acuna teams. So yes, the win rates and cash rates don't mean that much. It is a small sample, but it kind of just told me that if you just get one home run pick later, you're making up for the Acuna edge. Also, even looking back at previous years, Blake Snell in his Cy Young year had 15.7, so a little bit more than Acuna had this year, and Justin Verlander in 2019 had about the same as Acuna had this year. So going back to Acuna, the reason it's such a hot topic is because he's the first overall pick, and there's only one team that gets the chance to draft him, and it's based on luck. 1 out of 15 chance, basically, the way the NFBC does KDS. So personally, I'm not worried about it because I know I can make it up elsewhere. Is it yes, it's a big edge. If I look at my own projections, yes, Acuna is number one, but I'd be willing to argue that Strider is pretty close. And there's even hitters that are closer to number one than I'd expect, than I expected before. So I know that the projection systems that are out there with Steamer and the bat, they've got Acuna with a huge edge. And if you're going by those, then guessing the edge is probably even more than 8%, could be even 9 or 10%. But personally, I'm not worried about it. I got him in my OC, which is cool. But I've got a set number of fab leagues that I'm willing to do, a set number of lineups that I'm willing to do. If I had time to set 20 lineups and I was doing, I don't know, 10 150 DCs, then I might go up to 11 or 12, hoping to get one share at least, because overall it's a big contest. And if he goes nuts like he did last year, you want him in your lineup. But in my case, it won't affect anything. And I was kind of happy. I mean, the data I gave you about those guys, Bradish, Steele, Snell a few years ago, it kind of convinced me that they've said this before, but it's the great thing about fantasy baseball. It's 27 weeks, it's 23 players. Even if your first round pick gets hurt, you just need one good pick in rounds 15, 20, 25, and you can make up what you lost with your first round pick. So it's what I love about the game. And if you don't make that one great pick, you can chip away at it by making good picks. So I'm not worried about it. And I hope that people don't overreact and want to do a third round reversal or anything crazy like that, because it's one player and it's 1 year, and he could slow down a little bit and not steal quite as much. Like there's so many things that can happen that I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. I definitely would be vehemently against third round reversal, and I like that. Obviously hitting on any player in that 250 to 300 range is great, but hitting on an SP1 in that range, it just unlocks your whole roster basically. Like you just get that extra SP1 for basically nothing.
And I think one of the things, like the reason why their win rate and cash rate was higher than Acuna, I think because if you hit on that SP1 late, it's one less bench spot that you have to use on possible streaming a pitcher. You don't need 4 guys for your last 2 spots. You might just need 2 guys for 1 spot. So those bench spots that it opens up allows you to stream hitters, to speculate on a closer. So even though that specific player's edge wasn't as good as Acuna or as another hitter, it opens up other things that aren't shown in the numbers. But once you play, you realize how big those guys are that you hit on late in the draft.
Is there also like a skill element of like the teams with Eflin, Bradish, Steele obviously did something right to come to the conclusion that drafting those guys was a good idea? So you might be dealing with like a smarter average manager based on the teams that took those guys?
Yeah, it definitely could be. It's always hard to quantify. I know Tanner with the process has been trying to, it's brought that up. He's trying to kind of quantify it, but it's so hard. And the point he made about Judge last year, despite the huge edge, the average really good player in the NFBC is usually looking more at starting pitching in that range. It doesn't mean anything. There's good players that go for hitting in that range, but just typically he wasn't a player that most of the top NFBC players were targeting. So the win rate and cash rate for Judge teams was a lot lower than, I don't know the exact number, it was a lot lower than we might expect it based on the season he had.
Yeah. Yeah. I had 0 Judge that year. That was for a lot of reasons. Okay. So I've been thinking a lot about multi-position eligibility lately, and I don't have like a great question to like start off a conversation with you about it necessarily, but I remember, I think Dylan White mentioned something about just the edge that he experienced like in season with the guys that had dual eligibility on the Slack main event overall winner. And it really like hit home with me, like just anecdotally. I was thinking back to like my best teams from last year, and they just had a lot of guys that you could move around. And obviously we know that it's better to have multiple positions than just one position. And the guy that really stands out to me is Luis Rengifo this year. I think Zach McKinstry might have the same eligibility as him. There might be another guy or two that are just going super late that might have this eligibility, but Rengifo is the guy with the sort of highest ADP that has 4 positions eligible: second base, third base, shortstop, outfield. So he's got the corner, middle, and the outfield, both middle spots. So like I think Luis Rengifo, not only does he have the best positional eligibility of like guys who are being drafted in every league, but like projections don't hate him necessarily. Like he, if you just gave me any of his projections and said Rengifo is going to play all year, I think he's a screaming value where he's going right now. So I don't know if you have any just overarching thoughts on positional eligibility, or if you just want to kind of jump straight to like Rengifo and whether or not you're projecting him for everyday at bats.
Yeah, so specifically for Rengifo, I took him in my DC at pick 247, which I believe might have been a little bit after ADP. But yeah, I mean, he played 43 of the last 44 games last year before he got hurt. I know at that time he had a bunch of injuries, but I think we kind of expect the Angels to have injuries again. And he's been an above average hitter. I think WRC plus the last 2 years, something like 105 and then 114. So, I mean, it'd be crazy for the Angels not to play a guy who can play pretty much every position and who's an above average major league hitter. So I'm pretty confident he's going to play. I don't know where exactly, but that's the great thing about being able to play so many positions. They can move around. They can find a spot for him. As far as general strategy, I'll usually bump them up. So basically, if what I'll do is if say in the top, say the top 300 ADP, if there's, I don't know, 12% of hitters that have multi-position, I'll make sure that in my top 60 players that I target, I have at least 12%, because I think multi-position is worth at least what the market is giving it value for, and I think a little bit more. So I just want to be a little bit more than the market. So I'll want 7 or 8 of those guys in my top 60. If it's not enough, then I'll bump them up 0.25, 0.5 SGP, whatever. If just naturally my numbers love a lot of multi-position, I'm like, oh, I don't have to bump them up this year, just because I naturally like a lot of them. The reason I don't want to be too high compared to the market is because if you get 5 of them, then there's no point.
Diminishing returns.
Yeah, the extra 2 aren't worth that much. You're just moving guys around between, whether you put Rengifo at second and your other guy at third, or you just switch them back and forth. I mean, they're both in the lineup, so the second guy having multi-position isn't worth it. So I'll bump them up just enough so that I have the few that I like. One other question that comes up often is it more valuable in a Fab League or in a DC? I think it's about the same. I'd say for the first 15 rounds, it's the same. Once you get to around 16 to 30, then they're more valuable in the DC, because in the main, there's a chance you'll drop the player. In the DC, you have him all year. So as far as Rengifo, I think he's still in the range where in the main, you kind of expect to hold on to him for most of the year. But I might not bump him up as much as I would for our DC. But like whether trying to think of a name with multi-position early in draft, Mookie Betts. The bump up they give Mookie in a DC and a main, it should be the same in my mind. And I think for those top guys, it's worth a lot more because that guy's been on your roster all year, and just having the ability to, especially in a fab league, well, in a DC, it affects your, I like it because it affects your strategy for the rest of the draft, because because you don't know whether at pick 350 you're going to have a chance to draft a good outfielder, a good second baseman, or whatever. So having that guy at the top in the fab league, it also affects the rest of the draft, because you don't know. I mean, you can have a plan. You can say, I love these 3 second basemen in that range, or these 4 or 5 outfielders, but there can be a run, there can be adjustments. So I think the value in draft is also something that's kind of understated, but definitely in season with fab as well. Just how many, I mean, I'm sure you've had teams as well like this where you end up with 3 really good third basemen out of nowhere because guys had to break out. There's someone in your league that made a bad job. You don't want to pass up a player. So you pick them up in fab, and then all of a sudden you got too many third basemen, and it's covering your third base, CI, and UT spot. And then sometimes you might even have an extra one that you can't play, that you can't pick up. So having the ability to move guys around is useful, but you don't want to go crazy, because at the end of the day, it's about getting the best players multi-position that you're going to drop, or that's going to be sitting on our bench is useless. So it's a tricky thing. I always try to have a couple to just at least have the option to move guys around, but sometimes the draft just doesn't go that way. And I think it kind of comes with experience, with feeling, with knowing when to push up a guy when you need it. If you don't have a single one in round 12, and you're close between 2 or 3 players, I might reach down a little bit down my list just to get more options, to give myself more options in fab and later in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be a third baseman if I was going to have 3 position. Yeah, I mean, I think like Gunnar Henderson's a fascinating guy for that, because he's got the middle corner, and he's kind of going in a range where like you're comparing him against 10 guys, 8 guys, and his ADP's actually gotten lower, if I recall, since like November, December.
Yeah, I think so. I think I remember seeing him around 30. Now it's down to at least I think I have the last 12 DCs down to 35.
Yep. That's the exact kind of data I was referencing there. Okay, so before I talk with Phil about punting a category, I do just want to let everyone know that on this YouTube channel, if you're watching on YouTube, this RotoWire official YouTube channel is going to be our baseball only channel here in the next couple weeks or so. I think they're going to launch a football YouTube channel ahead of the NFL draft. So please subscribe to the RotoWire YouTube channel if you like watching our baseball videos. Greatly appreciate that. And then subscribe to RotoWire.com. Come hang out on the Discord channel, RotoWire.com/chat. You can send me a question on there whenever you want. Really appreciate you signing up for RotoWire this time of year. Great time to sign up. Dynasty content, redraft content, got you all covered. All right, Phil. So I know that you were, you cashed in the main event last year. And I think you were maybe the only team or one of like 2 teams that cashed that had even fewer saves than I had. I think I was like in the low 40s maybe. And I think you basically you did. I don't think you punted in the draft, but you did just fully kind of punt in the season.
Ryan Helsley.
Okay, Ryan Helsley. Well, yeah, let's just talk about. So that team, did you just go Helsley and then you took some specs that didn't pan out, basically, or?
Yeah, I had Helsley, and then I think I took some shots late in the draft. I think I picked up Liam Hendricks, at least the first fab, or I had Hendricks on most of my team. So I think I don't remember if I had him on this team specifically, but it was shots late in the draft. They didn't work out. Helsley barely got any saves early in the year. And then I took some shots on Jason Foley at one point. I think a Colorado closer. But like by the end of June, there's two things. The rest of my team was pretty good, but I lost Drew Rasmussen. I think I had Scherzer, who wasn't doing that good. So like I knew the rest of the team wasn't good enough to win an overall. If I'd kept going after saves, I would have spent $300 in fab and using roster spots. I knew if I used that, the rest of my pitching, my hitting wasn't good enough. So I figured this is the time. I think late June, I took some shots and then Halsey got her. I'm like, okay, this isn't working. This isn't an overall winning team. So let's just focus on the league. So I dropped Halsey when he got hurt. I dropped all my other specs. And when I do that, the way I do it is I think I had maybe 7 good starting pitchers. So for my other 2 spots, I picked up, ironically, Tanner Scott, who ended up getting a bunch of saves. But I was picking up when he was the 8th inning guy for $1 for ratios. And then I'd play matchups. So if Scott had 7 games that week, then I used him. I'm thinking in his case, he was so good I hung on to him. But I had Jojo Romero at some point. Just picked up other guys, basically streaming middle relievers from fab. So not wasting roster spots on my bench. So I'd use 5 or 6 of my bench spots to stream hitters or pick up spec hitters that, or maybe someone was playing in cores the following week. So that's how I boosted my hitting. And then middle relievers, if they had good, they're free, they're $1. So if they had good matchups, I pick them up, put in my lineup, in my pitching spots 8 and 9. And if I had enough good starting pitchers, if there's 2 start pitchers, I'd only pick up 1 middle reliever. So it's how, for me, punting saves is about using those roster spots to do something else. So you can say, oh, he finished, I think it was 11th overall. Imagine if he'd hung on to Halsey, or if he'd picked up another closer. But if I'd done that, my hitting wouldn't have been as good. My starting pitching would not have been as good. I probably wouldn't be able to afford Derek Skubal because I would have spent my money on closer specs and so on. So it probably, I don't think I could have finished higher. I think at some point I was looking at it, I probably could have moved up to 6 or 7, but with the number of saves I had. But I knew I was giving up on the overall, but I won the league and everything else went great. The streaming hitting went great. I hit on those. And then those relievers gave me great ratios. So I think that's the way to do it if you're punting. I never do it at a draft table, even in standalone. I don't know if it's the experience of playing the main event for 7 years now and winning it. Like the year I won in June, even in late May, I knew I had a good team that could win. And like you kind of, like, you probably know, like even someone who hasn't won, if you've played long enough, if you've won leagues, like, you know, pretty quickly in season if you have a team that has a chance to win and compete for the overall. So even if you're not up there in standings, like, you know, just by looking at the team. So I think from that experience, it's just knowing, being willing to move on quickly than most. Quicker than most. It kind of helps me for that, and it worked out last year. There's other times it hasn't worked quite as well, but it is what it is. I'm fine with those decisions.
Did you punt? Did you punt like wins and strikeouts in like a high stakes standalone? Like
yeah, I did it in a DC. It was a disaster and not something I'll do again. So that one, well, yes and no, because that one was kind of tricky. It was a $5,000 DC that was happening about a week before we go to Vegas. And there's so much attention to it. I knew the board was going to get out, and I kind of didn't want to give away the starting pitchers that I loved. So my idea was to draft 3 solid starting pitchers and then a bunch of relievers late. So I figured my hitting was going to be awesome. Those 3 starting pitchers are going to give me good ratios, and then add on to that later with relievers and the close I drafted. The problem is one of the close I drafted is Edwin Diaz. So I got nothing from him. I think the other one might have been Classier or Presley. I think, yeah, Presley was okay. But the starting pitchers were Verlander, Montgomery, and Lance Lynn. So so the 3 guys that I thought would solidify my ratios gave me like a 3.5 ERA on average with the 2 top closers. It just so like even well, obviously with Lance Lynn when he's at like a third of your innings early in the year or like 25% of your innings, I was at the bottom in wins, strikeouts, in ERA, and WHIP. So I'm like, it was the hitting worked out pretty well, but I mean, I still think the strategy can work, but everything has to go well. So I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other categories that I think about when it comes to like potentially premeditative punting are like batting average and stolen bases.
Yeah.
Do you think those are viable? I mean, like any strategy is viable if you take the right guys, but like, would you just advise anyone who's thinking about some kind of crazy plan like that to maybe take a step back?
The problem I have with batting average is that you're cutting down the pool of players that you can draft by so much. And it's like it's in theory it's a decent idea, and I think in an auction there's a better chance it works because you can target any player. But if you're at I don't know, if you're picking third and there's only 70 players that you're willing to draft whose batting average is low enough, well, half of them you're going to have to reach for because they're going to be drafted at the other end. So, I mean, you're going to end up reaching for players and you're going to pass on really good value. If I don't know, Jeff McNeil slips by 3 rounds, you can say, no, I'm not drafting him because I'm punting batting average. So in a draft, I don't think that makes sense. Speed, yes, a little bit more because number of guys whose steal base is limited. So you're not cutting down player pool as much as you are with batting average. But still, I mean, it depends on the league. If you're in a really competitive league that is won around 115 or 120 points every year, sure, you can try it. But if there's a year where it's won at 130, or a league where someone's talking about a main event qualifier where it's winner takes all. Well, if it's winner takes all, there's half the teams in July that say, I don't have a chance. I'm going to stop doing fab. So the top teams are going to be at, 130, 125. So if you're punting, you're already down to 135. So I never do it in a format like that. The 2 other categories I tried punting in season and almost worked was ERA and WHIP. I didn't have, it was an auction championship, I want to say 2019. I was probably 12th or 13th in the league, somewhere in June. My pitching was terrible. My starting pitchers got hurt. I was the bottom in ERA and WHIP. I'm like, well, let's try just pick up all the shitty 2-star pitchers, move up in wins and Ks, and then use all my other spots on hitters to stream hitting move up. I moved up to 4th. I think I was in 3rd for maybe a week or 2 sometime in August. So it almost worked. And I think that's one thing that most people would never even think of doing, but I'd still doing it then. I'd do it again if I have a team that's struggling and the pitching is just terrible. Nowadays in 2024, it's harder to do because the 2-star pitchers are harder to find that with than they were 5 years ago. But if you're desperate, you have nothing to lose. I think it's one option that can be tried.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's really, really fun to do. Just picking up the really bad 2-star pitchers, they're just putting them in and say, hey, you can blow up my ratios. I don't care. I just want you to get 9 strikeouts this week. It is fun to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that's more daunting than being in a big hole with ERA and WHIP. But I had a team last year where instead of punting ERA and WHIP, what I did was I dropped Alek Manoah around Memorial Day, and then I shot up and won the league.
Yeah, that's another way to do it.
So that was the key to winning that league.
There you go.
Okay, so I want to ask about auction strategy. You had a reply in in a Twitter discussion a couple months ago, just about the difference between snake drafts and auctions. And you said in an auction, you can come up with a list of 60 players you like, grouped by position and or skills and their average auction dollar value. And then when there's a player you like, you bid. And that was basically your 1-sentence auction strategy advice in that Twitter conversation. And I love this kind of advice. I love kind of narrowing the pool. I mean, that's like the fun part about auctions, anyways, is you don't have to end up with anyone you don't want.
Yeah.
But I have some follow-up questions for you.
Yeah.
How many? So like this group of 60 players, give or take. What does that group look like? Like how many first rounders are among the players? Like how many first rounders will you conceivably leave an auction with? Like how many relievers are in play for you? How many catchers are in play? Maybe just start with those three questions.
So I think the easiest, I'll tell you how I did my auction last year, and I think it'll answer most of those. When I went into my auction last year in Vegas, I had 6 players that were circled: Acuna, Strider, Cole, Romano, JTR, and Will Smith. So Acuna, my 2 aces, my closer, and my 2 catchers. And I budgeted around 180 for those 6 guys. Thinking if I go up to 190, I'll cut elsewhere. But and I had 1 or 2 backup players for all of those guys. So if it wasn't Acuna, I might have been looking at bats. If it wasn't Strider, Cole, Wheeler, whoever else. So I had 1 backup option for those guys, but they were targets that I thought were really undervalued. So if I had to pay $2 or $3 more than their AAV, I was fine with that. Luckily, I ended up in an auction where Acuna went. Actually, most of the guys went lower in their AAV, so I had ended up with more money to spend. But the way I kind of saw it, if I'm targeting 6 guys, if I pay $3 more for one, I might get a discount on another one. So the budget kind of worked out that way. And then by doing that, I had about $80 left for 17 players. I had room for about 2 or 3 in a $10 to $15 range, where the pool was pretty much wide open, and I was just waiting to, whenever I see someone that was too cheap, I going. So it ended up being Hunter Green for $13. The hitter, I think Ian Happ, I got cheaper than AAV. So basically just a couple bargains. They're in the middle range where there's dozens of players that go, and just from knowing the player pool, if I see a guy that I like that's going below his price, then I jump on it. And then I just had a giant list for guys under $5 or $6. Different positions, different skills. If, for example, I didn't get Acuna up top and I got bats, then I knew I need more stolen bases. So I try to get more stolen base guy in my list. And that final list was probably something like 40 players, where depending on when players get called, and if this guy gets called early, if you're doing a more spread the wealth strategy, you probably need more backup plans, because I find usually it's those guys in the $10 to $25 to $30 range where the price can be 10 in one and 18 in another. So that's why when I said those 2 or 3 bargains, I know like in the list of, 50 guys I kind of like in the middle range, I know there's going to be a bunch of 5 of them that go for $4 or $5 cheaper than their AAV. So I'm trying to get those bargains, have enough money left to get those. But if you're doing that for your whole, if you're trying to get 10 or 15 players in that range, you need a bigger list. I think you need a list of 35 guys, 40 guys for that range, because the price can vary widely. It can happen that all pitchers in that range go for more than you'd expect. So I think it works mostly if you're trying to get 2 or 3 guys, or if you know you want a top catcher, then you have a list of 2 guys, and whichever one has the best price, you get them. But I just find it. I know there's some people that go into an auction just with their values for every player, but I find it hard to adjust on the fly. Maybe someone who's done more auctions than I have has the ability to, okay, that's a good price, I'll get him. Okay, now I've got Acuna, I don't need as many steals, so I was kind of thinking guy in the $25 range. Okay, now I can't get that guy. So for me, it's harder to adjust on the fly. So I like just the strategy of narrowing down the player pool, knowing who I'm going after. And it doesn't mean the idea of getting 2 or 3 guys in the middle range means I'm still bidding on most players. So it's hard for others to know exactly which players are my targets. And if Betts comes up and he's at 35, I'm bidding up to 38. And if I end up getting him for 38 instead of Acuna, then that's fine. I'll switch up my strategy a little bit. But I like having those specific targets with pivots and just narrowing down the player pool. It makes it a lot easier to do an auction, and you can be successful with it. If you've done 20 or 30 auctions in your life and you're fine going in with just a pen and paper and you know all the values, then that can work. But I think for most people that are scared to do auctions, I think what I suggested is a kind of good alternative, not to get overwhelmed.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense.
Sorry, I know I'm talking really long and it kind of
No.
ranting, going around in circles.
Hey, you're answering. I gave you 3 questions for the price of 1, so you answer all 3 of them. So one of I think that we don't have time to hit on all this. I think that like $10 to $25 range of player is that's sort of like the tantalizing like breakout range of player that it is very tempting to go after. But I'm guessing that you end up with a lot of players in the kind of $1 to $5 range that you're pretty excited to get for those prices. Like how do you usually build out that caliber player? Like, are you usually getting guys that are sort of $2 or $3? Are you ending up with multiple $1 guys? Do you just
I think last I ended up with about 3 or 4 guys for $1. Especially pitching, I'd rather go 4 or 5 or 6. The guys that last year, the guys we talked about, the Cal Bradish just deal, Steven Matz, where you're not getting the guys that are going at pick 330, 350, but the guys that are going around 250, 275 in a main event, that those guys cost $4 or $5, and I think it makes the pitching a lot stronger that way. For hitters, like one of the guys I paid up for last year was Ha-Sung Kim. There's others that didn't work out as well, but I think if there's players you like, that 250 range in ADP is a range I usually really like. So those guys are at $3 or $4 in auction. So as many of those guys I can get, and then I kind of goes with, but depending whether I get 2 or 3 bargains in a middle range, whether I get them for 10 or for 15, that's where I kind of adjust the end game. I might have just planned for 2 players at $1, but if I get an extra bargain at a higher price, then I'll move some money around and figure it out. But yeah, I like that range. The other reason I kind of do it this way, in Vegas, I do 3 really high stakes league, the $5,000, which is the auction. And then the next day I have a 10 and 15. So I'm trying to get players in that auction first that I won't get in my other leagues. So if I'm spreading the wealth, getting a bunch of guys for $15, $20, those are the guys that you're in a draft that you don't want to pass up on those guys, but you also don't want too many shares. Whereas around pick 250, if I've got a guy in all my 3 big leagues, that's fine. So it's the same thing when I'm playing my 6 big players. I know where I'm picking the other drafts. I knew I was in first pick, so I knew I wasn't getting Acuna. So okay, let's go with Acuna. I knew I wasn't getting Strider. Okay, so I'll get him. So depending on where I'm picking, I try to diversify that way among my big leagues. I know it's not something that everyone has to deal with, but it is. If you're doing like a main and an auction in Vegas, and the auction comes first, you'll know where you're picking the main. So if you're picking 12, try to build an auction strategy where you're getting different players, because you don't want the same player, same $40 player in both of your big leagues.
Yeah, I haven't had to worry about mixing that up for my my $10,000 auction or anything yet, but hopefully we'll see. Hopefully I'll see you at the Champions League auction next year, and I can. I'll be an open book. If I'm at that table, it'll be easy to figure out which guys I'm in on.
Hey, 3 years ago, I thought those people were crazy who were spending that much money on fantasy baseball, but I got lucky and good in 2021. So now I've got a bankroll build up. So I end up in those crazy leagues that I never thought were even possible 4 years ago when I started looking more at higher stakes leagues.
Okay, so I've got put all these questions in a rapid fire tier. We'll see if it's actually that rapid, but
I'll try.
we'll start off with how useful do you find projections for players with no MLB experience? So like the bat, whatever, steamer,
Yeah.
whatever public projections. How useful do you find the projections for players with no MLB experience? And then is there a set of public projections you think does the best with those? Because that's where I think you see naturally some pretty big discrepancies with, one projection system thinking a guy's like a 88 WRC plus and another projection system thinking a guy's like a 105.
Yeah. I usually don't end up with those guys. In my numbers, the guy that hasn't played in MLB, I just use Steamer, just because I have Steamer data going back 10 years. So I can test it. I can put it in my numbers and I know I can stick it in if I need to adjust the value. I will. But usually with my other metrics, there's guys that I'll like and those guys get bumped up. Whereas the guy with no MLB experience, it's just their projection. So for me to draft a guy, I need to like him a lot more than Steamer, which doesn't happen if the guy has no MLB experience. So it's not, I can see value in those players, but it's not my strength. So I'll usually say it's Steamer. If for whatever reason I'm in a draft where that guy's slipping, then I'll draft him. But and even in DCs, I know you're probably I guess it's a question for you. Like, do you find that the prospects going around 30, 35 are that much better than the ones going around 45, 50? Like for me, when I look at their AAA numbers and I look at data, I'm like, why is this guy going around 50? Like Christian Encarnacion Strand was one of those guys last year where I was taking my early DCs in around 48 because no one was talking about him. And then in spring training, people kind of started noticing he got pushed up. But like him compared to a Kyle Manzardo last year, who was going, I think, around 30. When I looked at him, like, these guys are basically the same. So I'll get my old boring guys in round 30, 35, and then take some shots later. But I don't know if that's because I don't know prospects and I kind of noticed that, or if it's just I guess people looking at the market price. Oh, well, this is the price for this guy.
What about in season? Like, are you ever looking I know you're not necessarily the guy who's contending for Ellie De La Cruz's services or whatever, because you are, saving your budget. But are you ever looking at those, and putting real value into what they say?
I'll usually use Steamer, and in season, that's kind of what's going to drive. And for players I want to bid up on, like last, I got Ellie in one league. I got Matt McLean in most leagues. Matt McLean, I went nuts. I was pulling up MILB video and timing his time from home to second base to seeing what his sprint speed is going to be. So I was like, I'll do some weird stuff for prospects that I'm thinking about bidding. But like someone who just looked at Steamer for McLean would have bid on him because most people are just looking at his first week. That was terrible. But those that looked at projections, they're like, well, if this guy sticks around, he's going to turn around at some point. So in season, I'll look mostly at Steamer. I'll look at the bat as well. But I kind of like, I think Steamer might be a little bit more aggressive, but I like their conversion scale better, I believe, from minor league stats. I know Derek Carty does great work, and looking at StatCast stuff for players that make it to MLB, but I do like Steamer's conversion rate better, I think, for minor leaguers.
Okay, next rapid fire question. Which non-catcher who's going in the top 250 picks has the lowest projected batting average per your specific projections, not public projections? Like, which player going in the top 250 has the lowest projected batting average that you're expecting when you draft them that you're willing to roster this season?
So I have Kyle Schwarber at 212. But I think for me, his ADP is a little bit too high right now, so I'm not drafting him. Be fine if he slipped a little bit. The one I'm considering drafting the next is Varsho at batting average. I have him at 230, and he's one because of the other skills I'd consider drafting.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And
See, I can do rapid fire. That
was a
was
rapid
quick.
fire answer. Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah, Barshow, I like it. I like
Plus, he's a Blue Jay. It's always my tiebreaker. If I have two players that are close, either a Blue Jay or a Canadian, I'll bump him up a little bit.
okay. All right. Well, which is the starting pitcher who's going in the top 250 picks, who has the highest projected WHIP that you'd be willing to roster this season?
So this might sound a little bit like cheating because their WHIP was lower last year, but by my projection, I have Kikuchi at 1.36 and Christopher Sanchez at 1.37. I'd be fine drafting those by my projections because they have other skills and they're going late enough that I'm fine with it. Earlier targets, Dylan Cease, I have him at 1.28. I like Cease. I just don't like the team context. So I need him to get traded or to slip a couple of rounds for me to really consider drafting him.
Yeah, I don't dig that team context either.
Yeah, it's
they
were bad when they had players that were skilled and seemed pretty good, but it just now the roster's a disaster and the team spirit and everything else just it's what it's been before, and it's just I don't want anything to do with it.
At least they hired a guy from outside the org with no connection to the owner and none of that. So it'll be a completely new. Oh wait, no, they didn't do that. All right. We got rid of those. But yeah, I mean that's so everyone 136 for Kikuchi is what Phil's projection system has. So, during the season, what is your ideal hitter pitcher split on a 7-man bench?
So I'll start at 5 or 6 pitchers and 1 or 2 hitters. As the season progresses, it'll depend on how the team is doing, but I'll usually lean towards more hitters. My idea is to get starting pitching early to roster it, and then come May, I'll know which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones are hurt, and I'll drop those guys and then switch to hitters. And I think you can start the year with 2 hitters on your bench, or even just 1 if you have some multi-position. And then if you get 2 injuries, then you don't have a choice. You pick up more hitters. But if my team stays healthy, I'll try and keep at least 5 pitchers on my bench for as long as I can.
And what about, so in a fifth, I'm adding this in, so you're not prepped for this one, but okay. I think I asked you this last year, but in like a 15-team league, how many relievers are you ideally rostering, and how many of those relievers have the closer role?
Usually I don't like keeping a reliever that I'm not sure has the job at least early in the year, because I prefer stashing those starting pitchers. So last year I drafted 1 closer with 1 or 2 specs. If they don't have the job by mid-April, I'm dropping those specs. So at least for most of, say, from mid-April to end of May, if I can have 5 starting pitchers on my bench, ideally all healthy, I'm happy and I can play matchups. And then by the end of May, if the ones that suck, they're gone, or the ones that are hurt, I'll find other ones. But that's kind of the ideal strategy for me.
Okay, speaking of playing the matchups, I want you to rank the following as options for your SP3. So whoever your 3rd best starting pitcher is, rank these options for a potential start. So against the Dodgers, doesn't matter if it's home or away, just it's against the Dodgers lineup. At the Rockies, at the Reds, and if you want to mention like at the Red Sox or anything like that you think might be better in one of these, that's fine too. But just rank those options for your SP3 to go up against.
Well, the worst last year by far was at the Braves, and I think I was sitting everyone.
Oh yeah,
maybe even my ace at the Braves. But in the ones you listed, the Dodgers were the worst. Then the Rockies, at the Rockies, then at the Reds. So you kind of already ranked them there for me. And I'd probably put at the Red Sox right after the Dodgers.
Worse. So Red Sox, then
Yeah, worse.
Coors, then Great American.
Worse than the Rockies and worse than the Reds. I think the Rockies at home were like 7th or 8th in WOBA last year, so they're hard, but I think their team is getting worse every year. If they're healthy at the start of the year, if Brian is ever healthy, it might be a little bit different. But and one of the reasons I think it's the Reds kind of misconception. Great American Ballpark is great for hitters. There's a lot of home runs, but in terms of runs, it's 3rd behind Coors and Fenway. In terms of hits, it's 7th, according to that's the StatCast Park Factors rolling from the last 3 years. So there's a ton of home runs there. So it's great when your hitters are playing there. But in terms of pitching, we're looking more at runs and hits for WHIP. And the Reds lineup isn't as good as others. I'll gladly start my SP3 there if he's a good enough one.
Just looking ahead to 2024, do you think at Atlanta or at the Dodgers is worse?
I think at Atlanta, because I think the park is worse, and that one of the things with the Braves, they were healthy all last year, and their healthy players play 160 games. Like you're never getting an easy Braves lineup.
You also had you had 2 career years on the same team. Olsen and Acuna.
Yeah, and Ozuna. That was a surprise. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that lineup was pretty much stacked top to bottom, and combined with the park, at least last year, what I remember, like in terms of my park factors, it was by park and team factors were by far the worst. Dodgers with Ohtani can get there, but I don't think the bottom of their lineup is as strong as the Braves. And they usually, they're not resting Freeman and Betts, but at the bottom they're platooning more and they're resting guys when they have to. So I think the Braves, I think they still scare me a little bit more.
Yeah, I remember. I benched Joe Ryan going into Atlanta before Joe Ryan he kind of slipped up, I guess, over the last 2 months or whatever. But that's almost as fun as making the right streaming start. It's like making the right
it is, yeah.
P1 or SP2 bench, and then especially if you look at their started percentage and only 6% of teams that had the guy actually benched him for that one, that's always fun.
And one of the things, I think the gap between the top teams and the bottom teams is bigger than it was 4 or 5 years ago. And that's kind of goes back to what I was talking about, trying to have more starting pitchers on my bench. If you can't start Joe Ryan at the Braves, you need someone else on your bench with a good matchup. So if the teams are closer together and there aren't really any matchups that scare you for your top 3 or 4 pitchers, then you don't need 5 guys on your bench. But I think that the way the game is going, and I think what we'll see this year is there's going to be teams where you don't want your SP3 playing. So I think it's one of the reasons why I like having more pitchers on my bench. But you need good ones, because even against Oakland, you can't start anyone. So some really bad pitchers, especially in a 15-team league.
Yeah, that's a really good point, though. I mean, just the I think matchups in general for pitchers and hitters, but I mean, I don't think we talk enough about just making the right matchup play every week, because picking on those bad teams with the right caliber of pitcher is a pretty lethal strategy. Okay. Let's see. Do you ever roster long-term roster Rockies hitters who you always bench when they're on the road? Like, where not a guy that you picked up and then you're just like, well, I know he's got this one road series and I'll bench him for that, but a guy that you actually plan on rostering for months while always benching them on the road.
So I did it late last year. Once we get to August, I usually have more hitters on my bench. So I had Brenton Doyle on my bench. Doyle had actually picked up earlier, and I looked at my stats last year. McMahon and Doyle I used for about 80% of their at-bats when I had them on my lineup. So that's about 100% at home and about 60% on the road. So that's kind of the number I'm comfortable with if I'm keeping a guy for months. Once we get into August and Doyle became more of a streaming guy, I had the room to keep him and just start him at home and bench him on the road. But yeah, you need either like a larger, I always talk NFBC because that's what I play with 7-man bench. But if you have a 10-man bench, it's something you can afford to do for longer periods, or in a DC, for example. But I wouldn't draft someone and use them from April to September thinking, hey, I'm going to be starting to draft this Rockies guy and just start him at home. It's just not realistic.
Yeah. Not something I've attempted in the NFBC either, but yeah, I mean, like Brendan Rodgers is the guy that maybe comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like early in the season, I haven't looked at the Rockies schedule, but just because like second base gets pretty rough in my opinion at a certain point.
Yeah.
But I still don't even know if I like Rodgers enough to do that.
The other thing is that like Coors in April and May isn't Coors. So if you do it at the draft for 2 months, you're getting bad matchups in the row and in a home park that isn't as great as you expect it to be. But if you like the player and you like, I mean, you have to look at it. You project the full season. If you like the overall numbers better than you do any other player, then if you end up having the opportunity to sit him on the road, then great. It's a bonus. But you have to be kind of like I did. Like McMahon was an earlier pick, but he was kind of that range of guy where he's better than the alternative. So if the 40% of the time I was able to sit him on the road, great, it's a bonus. But you have to take the player and roster him based on I'm going to start this guy all year pretty much.
Okay, so last rapid fire question before we get back to our exciting post 380p sleeper series. Which Oakland A's players would you be willing to draft in the main event? And I've done some legwork for you here. I've got all the Oakland A's players with an ADP inside the top 550, and you can tell me which ones you would be willing to draft in the main event. Esteury Ruiz, Zach Geloff are the only two guys going inside the top 230. Mason Miller, Shea Langoliers going in the 230 to 260 range. Brent Rooker going at 305 on average. JP Sears 393. Ryan Noda, Joe Boyle, Seth Brown are going in the 400s. Tyler Soderstrom and Jordan Diaz are going in the early 500s. So which Oakland A's players would you be willing to draft at the main event table?
So Ruiz, no way, unless he slips by like 100 picks, maybe even more than that. Geloff, I'm not as high on as others, so I don't think I'll be rostering him. Mason Miller at his current ADP for me makes no sense. If you're getting we don't even know if he's going to close, but if he is, it's the Oakland A's, and I don't trust it. Langoliers is probably one I'm most likely to draft. I think he's in a decent range for catchers, where I often like to get my catcher, and I think he's good enough. He's going to play a lot. Rooker, if I need power, but I kind of have a bad taste in my mouth about Rooker. When I was telling you about my late DC targets last year, I'd done some research, some math. I had a list of maybe 20 guys, and he's one of the ones that I had circled for around 49, 50. But I'm like, it's Brent Rooker. He's nobody. I'm not going to draft him. So I didn't get him anywhere, even though he should have been one of my targets. So now he's going much earlier. If I need power, sure. But I didn't like that last year they were platooning him at times in a year where he was their all-star. He went to the All-Star game. He was by far their best player, and you're platooning him. It was just weird. It made no sense. So probably not. And then the pitchers, Sears, no, I think they're just not going to win enough games. I just don't want to bother with it. It's you talk about Ruiz, who kills you in pretty much everything except stolen bases. Well, Sears kills you in wins, in my opinion. So it's if I'm taking a shot in that range at pitchers, I'm going to go for someone on a better team who, at least if he performs and he hits, at least has a much higher ceiling.
So Shea Langoliers and maybe Brent Rooker are your answers. So like one and a half Oakland A's are in play for Phil. So just keep that in mind if you're drafted next to him when it comes time for Shea Langoliers. Okay. So Esteury Ruiz. I don't know.
I don't think you're drafting Ruiz either, are you?
And no, and like the other big problem, like obviously he sucks everywhere except for speed, but then if you take him at 130, you have to, it's like a challenging build the rest of the way to not end up with like a surplus of stolen bases. Like,
it is.
Right? Like what did you do with your earlier picks? Like, did you take like Corbin Carroll or Acuna, or like how many stolen bases do you already have? And then you have to make sure that you get, like, you have them for 60, and you need to make sure that you don't end up with like 25 too many steals. So just a lot of problems.
He's the kind, if I was gonna if for whatever reason my system loved him this year, he's the kind of player I target in an auction where you kind of call him out first, you bid on him. If you get him, then you adjust the rest of your strategy around him. If you don't get him, then you do a normal build. I think that's the one way we can kind of roster him. And I mean, the reason he's going there is because people get tempted by the power bats and like, oh, I need stolen bases, I'll take Ruiz, he's going to fix everything. But it can't be like a plan going to the draft, because if someone else is the same strategy, you miss out on them, and then you're in trouble everywhere. Yeah,
it's almost, you're raising your hand and saying like, I fucked up and don't have enough stolen bases.
Basically.
Do you feel the same about definitely I'd much rather roster this specific player, but like Luis Arraez with the Marlins, like similar challenges to me from a roster construction standpoint?
Yeah, especially like I used to like Arraez when he's going around pick 300, where you're kind of just taking a shot. Hey, I need a little bit of boost in batting average if I can drop in a couple months. But where he's going now around 150, it's with, I mean, I've got him for 10 home runs and 7 stolen bases, and you're not getting many RBIs as well. So you kind of, it's the same thing where if you take him, then your strategy for the rest of your draft kind of completely changes. I think he's a little bit easier though, because there's a lot of power speed outfielders usually in past pick 200. Like the past few years, there is like guys like Trent Grisham were going there. Lane Thomas kind of fit that mold as well. Like a Tyler O'Neill this year can. Yeah,
Varsho and like Jose Siri and guys like that. Yeah.
So you can kind of say, okay, I'm taking Rise because I'm getting good value, and then say, okay, I can go for those power speed guys a little bit later. But then again, I've said this a few times, you're cutting down the player pool, which I don't like doing. I like to be able to jump on a value when I see a value, rather than saying, oh, I need this specific category.
And then if Arraez gets injured in like May, then you have all these guys that aren't going to hit for high average on your team.
Right. The difference, at least with the Rise, is that in terms of batting average, out of like to like, I don't know, 310, 320 average, but out of, I don't know, what is it, like 6,000 at bats? Like it's not as big a percentage as Ruiz, like being 40% of your stolen bases. So at least it's not as bad, which is why I'd be willing to do it if it fit. But your point is right, that if you're going too extreme after that, you almost need a surplus in batting average, and then if he stays healthy, then you can adjust in fab in season. But it's not ideal. I need value compared to where he's going now.
Okay, so here we are. It's time to get back into the post 300 ADP sleeper series. Covered most of the positions. I think we got like maybe 2 left. This week it's going to be shortstop week. So Phil and I gave Phil a long list of shortstop eligible players who are going after pick 300 on average in 15-team draft and hold leagues. And we're each going to pick one shortstop that we think is the best value going outside the top 300. So, Phil, you can go first.
All right, I'll give you two answers. I'll give you my answer and I'll give you my system's answer. So my numbers at this point, they love Ahmed Rosario, where he's going. But in my DC that I'm doing right now, I just passed on him just because until he signs, I'm just worried that the projections I have right now are too generous on the playing time. But if he does end up getting a full-time job, just in terms of pure skills, I do like him. Until I see that, the only one that it kind of stands out is Orlando Arcia, just in terms of playing time. But like in my current DC, I made a point, just highlighted, make sure you get your shortstop by pick 300, and I end up having three of them. I want, if you get one at the top, you can afford just have two, but I'm really trying to get them early, just because there's so many good shortstops that for one of these guys to get a full-time job, I mean, you know a lot of these younger players better than I do, so I'm curious to hear your answer. But from my perspective of liking old and boring guys, no one kind of stood out to me.
So it makes all the sense in the world to me for the Rays to sign Ahmed Rosario.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't know why they haven't already signed him. Like, what are they waiting for? So if like the Rays signed him tonight after we're done recording, is Ahmed Rosario like a guy that should be going in the top, like in the 250 range?
I think so, because I don't believe they have a shortstop in the lineup that hits left-handed, right? So if their plan is to playing every day, then yeah, definitely, I'd look at him at least the top 250. I think so. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I like the Rosario call. My answer for second base was Liover Peguero, so like I'm not going to recycle that answer, but that would be my answer again here since he's dual eligible. Really like Peguero as like a 2020 threat, and I think he's definitely their best second baseman. But I will give a unique answer. I like Kyle Farmer more since the Polanco trade. But I'm actually going to go with the last guy I listed on the sheet here, Daryl Hernaiz with the A's. The A's are obviously very bad, like we kind of just covered. And I think Hernaiz can go like 15-10-ish with a pretty solid batting average. Now I thought Jordan Diaz was going to be a bit better than he was last year for the A's, kind of under similar logic that he just had a decent enough hit tool and no one really standing in his way. But Hernaiz is actually like a good enough defensive shortstop that I think he could play there. Whereas Diaz is like, if Diaz could play a good shortstop, he'd be much more interesting, but he's kind of like a corner guy without corner power. So I like Daryl Hernaiz. He had a 10.7% strikeout rate at AAA last year, 9.5% walk rate. And he has some decent kind of under the hood stuff, or at least he's got more impressive, or he hits the ball a little bit harder, I think, than his surface stats might indicate. He had a 105.4 90th percentile EV last year, AAA 112 max. So I think like upside of like a 275 hitter with like 10 homers and 15 steals is kind of what I see with Daryl Hernaiz.
See, I never heard of him, but I pulled up his Fangraphs page and I like it. Just in terms of like, even Steamer has him projected for guess if I make it to 600 plate appearances, he becomes about a 1.8 WAR player, mainly because of his defense. So that's I mean, I think that's kind of what you want with the late shortstop, a guy who can get in there with his defense and then you rack up the other stats at the same time. So.
But I can confirm that this is definitely the shallowest position, like you sort of alluded to, of all the positions we've covered here. The post 300 options at shortstop are the weakest. I can say that pretty confidently. And that makes sense if you kind of think about it, like you said. So, yeah, I think that is a position where if you kind of are deciding between shortstop and another position with a pick, I'd get shortstop out of the way if you can.
Yeah.
All right, Phil, this was great. I appreciate you staying as long as you did. Anything you want to add before I let you go?
No, I just want to say you're good at this. You get me talking, so I'm giving up. I'm giving more away, and it's the podcast I love the most. And I'm doing it with a friend like you. That it just becomes a natural conversation, and I love podcasts like that. So other than that, spoke about the Champions League earlier. So if anyone has any questions about it, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Toby on my Twitter and the Discord. I'm most places. So yeah, that's about it.
Absolutely, man. I think I'll be. I had a great time, as you can attest, at your birthday dinner last year. I don't think I'll be making it this year. I think I'm flying out on Friday morning.
Yeah.
But are you going to
would
be
have
there?
gotten your invite by now, but that's what I heard that you weren't going to be there for the weekend, so I didn't send you your invite.
Are you going to be there like Wednesday or Thursday at all?
Yeah, I get there Thursday during the day, so we should see each other for at least Thursday night.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you Thursday night in Vegas, and I'll have another episode with another main event overall champion next week.